your first time to the webinar series here at Cambridge Marketing College on how to future-proof your brand. We're talking about marketing sustainability, and we're going to unpick it yet again, as we have in the previous two. This is the third of the series, and it's a series of 3, and will be very, very interesting to unpick this again from a slightly different perspective here today. So I'm joined by Nigel again, Nigel Clark, who has been presenting and setting the scene for us in the previous 2 sessions, and also was a panelist. And today we are joined by the illustrious company of Charles Nixon, founder of Cambridge Marketing College. And Charles will be in conversation with me after Nigel has his introductory presentation for us. And Charles and I are going to talk about a host of ways that we believe, we hope, that we can actually move this game forward, because we've identified, as we've been going through these previous 2 sessions, we've identified a whole host of opportunities. We looked at how you can begin to embrace sustainability as a concept within your organization. We talked there at quite some depth about the definition and how we can actually define sustainability as marketers. We've also looked at how to avoid greenwashing, because as soon as you begin to do anything in this field, you run the risk of putting your foot in it and actually getting it really, really wrong. So we talked about how to potentially identify the concept of greenwashing and how to really avoid getting it wrong, or at least reduce the risk of getting it majorly wrong. And we're here today on this third of the 3 in the series to identify potentially some ways that you can start to take those early steps on building a sustainable brand. So actually embracing some of the ideas and thinking behind marketing sustainability, and seeing if we can actually figure out a way of really making some inroads into this and actually beginning on this journey. Now, for some of you listening to this, and I know some of you are coming back for the 3rd installment here, for some of you, you're already on this journey. So hopefully what we'll be doing today is opening up a number of little opportunities, or maybe different perspectives or ways of adding to the mix of things that you're already doing. If this is very, very early days for you, if this is an opportunity to begin the thinking, starting to shape up some of the models, some of the actions, some of the stakeholders you're going to need to engage with, you're also in the right place. So we're trying to kind of balance this with being a little bit of something for everyone in terms of how to future-proof your brand, because whether we like it or not, this stuff is not going to go anywhere. This stuff is not going away. So why are we doing this series? Well, there's kind of 2 reasons really, is to obviously be very, very helpful to you, hopefully as an individual or as to an organization. We're doing this in collaboration and in association with the Mindful Collective, of which I'm one of the co-founders. The Mindful Collective is a not-for-profit organization that looks to help you with a range of guidance, advice, consultancy services, workshops that are generally focused on delivering something to a higher purpose. In other words, identifying really why are your organization or business, well, why does it exist? Why are your people all gathering together to do something? And it isn't just about product and service. And we're very passionate about collecting good examples of models for how to do this. And also, really interestingly, some interesting case studies. So if you have something to share, or you're looking to get a little bit of a guidance on those first steps, then head over to mindfulcollective.net and you'll see some of the guidance and services available to you. We're also doing this as an introductory kind of whetting your appetite to an upcoming corporate social responsibility or corporate responsibility sustainability practitioners apprenticeship. It's a bit of a mouthful, but we'll kind of explain a lot more about that a little later, which is a new apprenticeship that the college is going to be launching later this year. So keep your eyes and ears open for that. If you're registered on this, we will be in touch with you with details of that when it becomes available. But this is about putting a little bit of a formality around this topic so we can hopefully move the game forward, because it's all very well talking about this, it's all very well being on webinars about this, but what we're trying to do here is to help you and guide you in taking those initial steps. So we began in the series, the very first one, with Nigel and Joe. We talked about defining this. This is one of the key things, and I'm sure Charles will have a view on definitions of this when we have our conversation a little bit later in this session. We started with trying to define it and really trying to understand the role that marketing can play. In the second session, we looked at the greenwashing element. We had a panel discussion with some examples that Nigel shared with us. We came at this from a number of different perspectives, really to, as I say, reduce the risk, but also to be very, very mindful that everything that we do in this space has an impact. Nigel is going to share some steps that we can take in just a moment when we listen to his presentation. But it is about just being really mindful and really conscious that this is a sensitive topic. And as soon as you start talking sustainability, both internally with your external stakeholders and particularly in public, you open up an opportunity to be authentic and transparent as a brand, but that with it has the caveat that there's a sense of sensitivity in there in terms of, you know, saying the right thing and almost really raising the bar to the accountability that you have as a marketer. So there's some really important stuff going on there. And what we covered, and we did a little poll actually in that session, we covered the question of how much evidence really should we be providing to move away from this kind of view that CSR, corporate social responsibility, is one of those things that, you know, everybody does, but that often it's a lot of hot air, or as we might define in this particular instance, greenwashing. So we asked the question, you know, how much evidence is your organization or business using right now when you communicate CSR or green eco-sustainable messages? And the vast majority, over 90% of people say that they always or sometimes base their communications on evidence. So less than 10% said we either don't collect it or we do collect it, but we don't share it. So there is this kind of quality thing going on, and I know Charles will have a view of this a little bit later this morning on the importance of gathering data and evidence and the kind of the numerical and empirical evidence behind doing this right. So it isn't just about storytelling, it's about having the proof to back up that storytelling. And that was one of the key ways that we discussed in that panel, that we need to be kind of shaping ourselves up if we decide that we're here to do the right thing, that we're shaping up the stories that we're telling. So actually backing this stuff up and really putting our money where our mouth is. So what are we going to do today? Well, today's essence is about building a more sustainable brand. It's about the definition. It's about gathering the evidence. It's about some of the reasons why now is the time to do this, and also giving you some ideas about how you can begin that journey. So as I say, Nigel's going to share some ideas with us, and then Charles, we're going to be in conversation with Charles, who will come at this from a very broad, very strategic, very economics-based perspective, because he often does. And he'll give a wry smile now thinking, oh goodness, that really sets the bar high. But we know from Charles, and it always is the way, Charles will have some real wisdom to share with us. And we have some topic ideas that we're going to cover and throw at Charles to see where his thinking is right now. So I know you're going to find this a very valuable session from a different range of perspectives. But as with all of these kinds of webinars, if there's just one little golden nugget that you take away and go away and build upon or test, then our job is done. You know, we cannot fix it right here today, but hopefully what we can do is sow the seeds for a really, really sustainable future. Okay, so first poll. Lauren is going to put a poll up on the screen now, and this poll is, and we did ask this one back at the beginning of the first session, and because we've taken a bit of a journey since then, we thought it would be interesting to do a little bit of a before and after. So here's the question then, based on, if this is your first time, you can answer this question raw right here, right now. But if you've been to the previous 2 webinars, and I know some of you have, what is your view now? How important is it that marketing leads the sustainability debate in a business? Is it very important, slightly important, not very important, or completely unimportant? How important is it that marketing leads the sustainability debate in a business? And we'll see whether we've had any change or movement in thinking. Obviously, we can't choreograph the answer here. This is live, and this is an anonymous post as well. So when you give your answer here, and as soon as Lauren is happy that we have enough answers, we will see what the overall answer is. And this is an anonymous poll, so we can't accredit the answer with any particular individual. So you can feel confident that this is all being aggregated up to the highest level. So how important is it that marketing leads the sustainability debate in a business? How much accountability and responsibility should we be taking? And the answer then, big drum roll, Lauren, can you give us the answer? What are the numbers? Lauren is about to share with us the answers. And as she does, interestingly, we see a slight differential between the last time, because last time, the previous answer was that 72% of you said it's very important that marketing leads the debate. Now the number is 62%. 38% of you think now it's slightly important, but really interestingly, whereas before 7% said not very important, now everybody's saying there's some level of importance in marketing leading the sustainability debate. Now that to me is really, really interesting, because I think what that is telling us is that we've recognized this is hard, this is tough, this is not an easy thing to do. But now everybody is now saying, and obviously some people have been listening to some of the earlier guidance that we've come across here, is that actually we should be taking accountability for it, but we probably need to involve others. So I think collectively, everybody on this session here is saying, yeah, time we stepped up to the mark, it's time we stepped up to the plate, but actually it's not just about marketing. So that's what I'm seeing. This is a very, very clear message that is a difference between the start of the start of the first webinar and where we are here today. So we've migrated now to everybody saying it's important, but actually it's not as very important as it was that we lead it. So who, I guess it's a rhetorical question, not for you to answer right now, but who is it who is going to be leading that debate with us? So that's possibly something we're going to cover with Charles in a short while. So I'd like Nigel now to take the reins of this webinar and start to kind of lead us in a direction of what we can do about it. If it's up to us to do something about it, what is it then that we are going to be doing?
Maybe I'll come off mute first. Thank you, Neil. I was very interesting that challenge there, and I will just bring my screen up, and so hopefully I can help people with that conundrum, which is we all think it's important. As you point out there, Neil, we're beginning to think that maybe it's quite difficult. We need to involve others. But needless to say, as you might expect, I was one of those people that think it's very important. And I'll say a little bit now about why that is, and also give some ideas about how you can make this work. So if you were part of the first webinar, you may recall this. This is where I got to in terms of how do we combine sustainability and marketing. I don't like calling it sustainable marketing or marketing sustainability. I think it's bringing two important management concepts together, and I'm sure Charles will say more of that shortly. I redefined what marketing was all about from a sustainable perspective. And I sort of set the challenge for people or for marketers in terms of how they might take this forward in their firm. So one was to decide what sustainability means for your brands and organization. Secondly, to understand your impacts and opportunities. And third, to step forward and put your skills to good use. And I will pick up on those points, but in reverse order. And hopefully come up with that answer about how do you start to build a sustainable brand and avoid this, which is, as Neil said, the topic of our second webinar, which was greenwashing. And how do you avoid that? Because that is what gets thrown at marketers time and again, is that we're just greenwashing. So let's start with the positives here. That point about stepping forward and using skills. I think marketers are perfectly positioned to lead the development of a sustainable brand. And all of these circles are important, but as I said on the first webinar, you can look at that, the hard stuff, the hard skills that marketers have, be that needs analysis, market research, data and analytics. All those are absolutely critical if you are to build a sustainable brand. But I'm more interested actually in the soft skills that marketers have around communications, change management, stakeholder engagement, and customer behavior. They're absolutely critical to building a sustainable brand. They're absolutely critical for an organization to make that change. And I think that basket of skills, both soft and hard, more often sit in the marketing team or marketers than they do in other parts of the organization. That's why I believe we should be at the front of this change program. Now, everybody likes a mnemonic, and here's mine in terms of helping people to build a sustainable brand. I had to slide a "the" in there, but I've called it "up the pace" because I think pace here is important, but the aspects of it I think are more critical. So my mnemonic, or my process that I would encourage people to follow, is to understand your impacts, redefine your purpose and brand proposition. In our first webinar, Neil talked very much about purpose with Joe and the importance of that. I think if you both understand your impacts and redefine your purpose, you're then in a really strong position to agree your priorities and take action. We know this is a complex field, and therefore identifying what you need to do first, or where the real priorities are before you take action, are critical. And then the third piece of the equation for me, the C and the E of up the pace, where marketing skills really do come to the fore, is measuring and communicating change. I say measure because demonstrating performance, demonstrating improvement is absolutely critical in this. This helps avoid that charge of greenwash. And so measurement and communication really go together. And then engagement with stakeholders. You really do need to have a very vigorous, open, transparent, and honest debate with your stakeholders about where you're going on this journey. And as with any virtuous circle, that engagement will help you redefine and re-understand where your impacts are, so you can have continuous improvement. So understand purpose, priorities, action, communicate and engage are what's important, I think, to building that sustainable brand. So why do I think this is the right model? Well, first of all, you do cover all the bases. Understanding and purpose is really about strategy and positioning. Priorities and action is really about practice. It's about implementation. Communication and engagement is critical because it's about the openness, the transparency, the involvement, that everybody has a part to play in building that sustainable brand. All of those different aspects means that this will appeal to all your key stakeholders, whether it's internally in terms of management and staff, whether it's your investment or financial community, and critically, it will appeal to customers. And I think you can really, and marketers leading this, can make it really brand focused and greenwash free. Now, I'm not going to go through every one of those steps today. We don't have time, but I will reflect back on a few things that I said in our first webinar around that first box there in terms of understanding your impacts. We talked about the complexity of sustainability. And my encouragement is that you pick a model, but I think the triple bottom line, the 3 Ps, is something you can really grasp hold of. So the planet, people, profit, 3-legged stool, triple bottom line, whatever you want to call it. Thinking about your impacts in terms of environmental balance, and I include within that climate change, social inclusion, and economic equity. All of those 3 points, your organization, your brand might be having some sort of impact, and understanding where those are, what the significance of that impact is to your brand, to your stakeholders, is absolutely key. And then the other point I will say, and I again touched on this before, is where I am so enthusiastic about marketers being involved in this process is you need to look at your full value chain. So not just within the organization, you need to understand the impacts across that triple bottom line in your supply chain and in your customer use. And I think marketers have a really great understanding of value chain. They really appreciate that brand can change, or people's perception of brand can change right through that value chain. So it's not just what goes on within your organizational boundaries. Your brand can be enhanced or it can be damaged in your supply chain and in customer use. And so if you want to build a sustainable brand, you really need to understand, or your starting point has to be, how you impact your triple bottom line through that value chain, not just within your organizational boundaries. So before I hand back to Neil and Charles, I'll just give my view on what marketers should be doing next. So I didn't know the outcome of the poll or what Neil was going to say on that. But first and foremost, I think it's important to share this with colleagues. Yes, we need to step forward, but it needs to be a collective effort. And I think within an organization, there is so much positive energy around the sustainability debate at the moment that I hope it won't be difficult to build a community of enthusiasts within your organization. And I think it's really exciting if you build that around the brand. I think it's important that you review each stage of the process and work out where you are now. How well do you understand things? How well are you communicating? Are you taking action? Do you understand your priorities? And there will be some reset there, but I don't think you necessarily need to start with the understand box. It's important that you do that, but there's a risk that you get bogged down in mapping your value chain, understanding all your impacts, things. Sometimes if you sort a few priorities, maybe in consultation with your stakeholders, and take some action, then you'll get moving. There is a risk here that complexity and analysis paralysis take hold. So get started, dive in, and as I say there, up the pace. I think momentum, speed, desire, movement here is really important. So I'll leave it at that, and on that point, I will hand back to Neil, and I'm sure he will pick up the debate with Charles.
So thank you, Nigel. Building a community of enthusiasts. Ooh, I think there's going to be the first question I'm going to broach to Charles to get his view on that. I mean, it's that word enthusiast, isn't it, really? Is when if you kind of take a look back into your organization, small, medium or large, and then you look there to see whether anyone's actually enthusiastic about this stuff, that's going to be an interesting one. You might instantly identify those individuals, but I think that word enthusiast, that's key, because if you try and drag people kicking and screaming into this space and think, oh, everybody's going to feel as passionately as I do because I'm a marketer, I saw the poll and I've got to take responsibility, and then you expect everybody to follow you like the Pied Piper. I think you might be hoping for quite a bit too much there. So that's one of the areas I want to really start to cover with Charles, and we'll see his take on this. But Charles, for those of you, so those are the audience who haven't actually met you or seen you before, do you want to give a little introduction as to kind of who you are?
Oh, blimey, Neil, that's right. Well, thank you for all the introductory bits. I hope I'll be as interesting as you've laid out as I might be. I founded the college 30 odd years ago. My background is in marketing for about 45 years for old technology and new technology companies, from textiles through telecommunications, software, financial services, and really looking at marketing from nearly every angle, whether it's from lobbying, communications, market research, and through to strategy and implementation. So my background is really quite wide. I've kept up that as I've gone into sort of semi-retirement and handed over the reins of the college to Kieran. I'm now a trustee of a local museum, which indeed is where I spent most of this morning looking at how to decarbonize that museum on a webinar, which is really quite an interesting challenge. I'm also a mentor of various startup organizations in Cambridge through the Judge Business School at the university. So I'm looking mainly at ed tech, but also some various other new technologies that are coming out. And Neil and I have often discussed the issue of technologies, and so it's fair to say that I probably am a technology enthusiast.
So we're going to come on to the whole technology and where that fits in this debate a little bit later. But I just want to come back to the point that, because it's still ringing in my ears as, oh, I think this could be something. And we're always trying to look for something in these webinars. So Nigel's point about this enthusiastic, committed community internally, I'm just going to sort of put that as a phrase to you, Charles. I mean, is there something there? Do we need that?
Well, the image it immediately brings into the back of the mind, Nigel, is unfortunately is going around in saffron robes and banging drums. But I'm not quite sure that's exactly what you meant. So I think we probably need to think about it in the fact that most organizations do need to repurpose themselves these days. What they were doing from the days of Milton Keynes, when the business of business was business, has now got to change. And Neil, I think you quoted someone from Children's Dreams or Fires from American Native Indians, who are constantly looking at what they did today and the impact on the future. The element here is that most organizations can continue to do what they do, but most marketers need to take on board the fact that customers will want that to be mitigated in the impact that it has on the world. So there are undoubtedly barriers within any organization to change. So Nigel's point about bringing together a group of enthusiasts to change the organization internally, as well as the movement externally, I think is very valid. You have a situation where the head of GE used to say that if you don't evolve as fast as the world around you, you're going to be as dead as a dinosaur. So this is true. If the world outside and your marketplace is evolving in its attitudes to what we might call sustainability or ethical activities, then the organization has got to change at least as quickly. In order to do that, you've got to wear down the barriers internally and go through a change management process. And as Nigel quite rightly points out, most of that is going to be communications with stakeholders, with internal stakeholders, and obviously with external stakeholders. So the comms side, the persuasion side, is very, very important part of this whole process of evolution of the organizational. So we need definitely to have a group of enthusiasts. Banging drums, probably yes. Just have to think about how we present ourselves.
And it is that presentation of it, isn't it? I think that's really, really key here. Just making sure that this isn't over-promising, this isn't kind of under-delivering, that it's appropriate and also authentic. I mean, one of the words I hear myself using a lot when I'm talking to organizations and individuals about this topic is this word authenticity. I just see it and hear it. It just seems to be one of those real kind of hook words in this debate. How does an organization, you know, again, I'm sort of thinking about the people listening to this who potentially are thinking, well, just give me those first steps, just show me the direction, show me which way I need to go. If this word authenticity kind of keeps coming in there, how do we kind of take those first steps, but retaining that sort of authentic nature of what we do?
And the first answer to that is honesty. So you have to be honest and say that your organization, under its current methods of operation, is a polluter or is causing problems with the planet. We all do. You know, our existence creates carbon dioxide emissions. I mean, one of the biggest issues that you and I have talked about is the fact that if you wanted to reduce your impact on the planet, don't have a child. That's 50 tons of CO2 that would be removed. So, you know, one of the aspects of everybody's activity is that we have an impact on the planet. So honesty. So firstly, accept that there is an issue, then think about how you're going to go about changing that. And the hardest thing, I think, these days, certainly from the seminars and the articles that I'm reading, is the way in which it's being proposed is that you start your measurement. So you measure your existing impact, which is an obvious thing to say from a strategic perspective, but it shows limited activity to an external market. You want to be able to show and have those activities that the marketplace sees as being something moving in the right direction. So a lot of organizations get accused of greenwashing when they say they're going to do something, but it takes them a long time to do their assessment process, and therefore nothing appears to happen in the market. So many organizations get accused of greenwashing. And I think that's unfair sometimes. The other aspect, I think, is that you have to think about the stages that you're going to make, but you could do some things automatically by adding elements into what you offer at the moment. Nigel's value chain, for example, talks about, you know, the supply side, the production, and then the consumer usage. Educating the consumer into how to use the product better, to recycle it, to reuse it, or even to take it back and repurpose it is probably one of the biggest areas I think many organizations can make a contribution very quickly. Changing their actual carbon footprint may be harder in terms of processes that require rejigging.
So really what you're saying there is that most of these early steps, because that really is the focus here, is how to future-proof your brand, how to begin to do this thing. It is what you're saying, I should make assumption here, is what you're saying, the fact that people should be auditing, measuring what is now the reality, and it almost doesn't matter what the answer is, you just have to own up, this is our reality, because as soon as you start to kind of put a cloak over that or to try and veil it in something it isn't, you're on the back foot, and so trouble is, you know, coming in the future. So as long as you're authentic with actually, this is our starting point, and we're going to own up to that, we're going to make it public, and we're saying, but we're doing something about it, you know, just trust us, come on the journey with us. Is that enough?
I think your cloaking point is right. You don't want to hide what you're doing. You need to talk about what you're doing. And yes, you do need to accept that you've got to do the analysis. But I think at the same time, you do also need some symbolic aspects of marketing, to show that you are making movement down the decarbonisation path, or something that you're going to develop. So you can't just expect your customers to trust you for 18 months, having said that we are going to do something, but don't actually show that you've done anything because you're spending the time measuring. And it may well take you 18 months to do the measuring, but it needs the customer's faith in you has got to come back or be sustained. So coming back to your point about authenticity, you've got to keep them informed, as Nigel has said, but I think you should also look to some symbolic aspects that you could do along that early part of the journey.
So when Nigel talks about kind of it's potentially right throughout the supply chain. So for those of you listening to this, if you're not kind of aware of supply chain as a concept, it is that kind of end-to-end journey that any kind of widget or element that you provide eventually to the end customer or the end user. It's that chain of events and actions and added value that little widget goes through before it reaches the customer, and you're part of that ecosystem. So question for you, Charles, is that if we sort of say that supply chain is potentially, it's a big part of this, particularly when it's kind of sourcing raw material or raw production of product from somewhere that is possibly less authentic, shall we say. If there's good examples out there in the world, and you could maybe change your supply chain to source product from somewhere that's just already got the ticks in the boxes and the big golden star and everything, and it's kind of seen and it's got evidence of being the place where you buy this stuff, is that a quick win? Can you actually just change your whole supply chain to tick a lot of these boxes rather than always focus in on yourself and say, look, I've got to do all the hard work here? Whereas actually, if there are organizations out there that you could bring into the supply chain, could they be doing it on your behalf?
Depends obviously on your supply chain and what are the main impacts that you're going to record from your overall assessment. But yes, if your supply chain has the ability to be replaced, then that's perfectly reasonable. Except I would suggest that you probably would want to look at your existing supply chain and seeing if they're prepared to change to better practices. This is about managing a business. It's not just about making a quick win in a few tons of carbon. You've got to manage a business. I mean, if you talk about organizations that have been asked to decarbonize completely and to remove themselves from many of the sectors that they're in, some of the examples that have come out about BP and Shell, should they decide to completely end oil exploration and production, we'd have a great problem in the world because we still use oil, though we should probably want to reduce it, but they also employ large amounts of people. And that throws lots of people out of work. So there is an ethical side to this as well as an environmental, and you have to balance the two. So in answer to your question, if you are going to move your supplies to a different, better source, then obviously have a conversation with your existing suppliers to make sure you can give them the opportunity. They may well be doing the same thing as you're doing at the moment and wanting to improve. One of the important things that's come out of some of the research that has been done and I've seen recently is the fact that some of the quick wins are actually what you can do yourself rather than what you can do in the external environment in terms of your supply chain or indeed your customers. So one of the examples that was given this morning was actually checking how you actually manage the heat system in your own offices. So does everybody know how to turn the air conditioning down or up, as the case may be, making sure that the window management or the air management is sensible rather than some people having the windows open and someone ramping up the air conditioning. It's simple things that are often the easiest quick wins, and you can measure that quite quickly by looking at the carbon content of your electricity. And there are various places like Julie's Bicycle where you can actually go and do some analysis quite quickly and measure your carbon consumption based on your electricity usage. So these things are important to do straight away, and then they can be reported. Coming back to Nigel's point and the point about keeping the authenticity aspect that you're talking about, tell people what you're doing. So not that you are just measuring, but also that you are actually doing something.
I said we'd come on to the topic of technology, and that to me feels like it's the time now to kind of mention the whole tech thing. Is almost like now you're starting to talk about data and measurement and numbers and monitoring trends within this whole kind of human behavior, because ultimately this is about human choices and decisions and behaviors in the real world. But underpinning all of that, and I know Philip Kotler talks a lot about the only way that marketing really has a part to play at the table of this debate is if actually it embraces technology properly. He's sort of been recently quoted as saying that he doesn't believe that sustainability could be solely owned by marketing. I think the poll today has kind of borne that out, but that actually we can influence it across the entire marketing mix. But he would say that actually you can only do that if you're embracing technology. So from a marketer's perspective, listening to this, if we say technology, I mean, that's a big word. Where would they kind of begin really to be using tech, or at least doing some research about the tech that might inform some of these activities that they'd be thinking of doing?
I think there are two elements here. One is the data and the other is the technology. Marketers inherently should have skills about doing market research, and the result of which they should be the natural place any organization should come to get an understanding of what is going on internally and externally in the company, not only in terms of activity, but also in attitudes. And I think that constantly fed into the organization, what their customers are expecting, wanting, and how they react to changes that have been made is something that allows marketers to have authority within the organization. In terms of technology, there are a whole host of issues here, but again, marketers, because of their data analytical capabilities, should be the people who should be interpreting the amount of data that's coming in a practical way rather than a technical way. So, for example, it would have cost several thousands of pounds, if not tens of thousands of pounds, to have building management systems that would tell you how much electricity you're using every half an hour and where that might have come from by its source. You can now buy pieces of software which will cost maybe 500 or so pounds, sit in the cloud, and can be attached to a simple data logger, either into your input for your electricity or indeed for any of your major devices. So the element you've got now is the ability to grab standard pieces of software and then use that data. So marketers must embrace data. I agree with Philip entirely on the basis that we're the people who can understand what the customer needs to understand, as it were. So an electrician, God love them and all that, will give you all the technical information you would love. But interpreting that and what it actually means is something that a marketer needs to do, because they need to understand how it should be communicated effectively. And so I think data combined with technology. Taking it a little further, Neil, if I may, one of the aspects that I still teach is the element of looking at contemporary challenges and innovation in marketing. And one of the elements here is a very nice quote that the future actually has arrived. It's just not fully distributed yet. And I think that's an interesting one, because there is now, as we look to the future, it is a combination of existing software and hardware that's available that will allow us to change. So the digitization, the dematerialization of products, is a major way to decarbonize. The movement online of things which are otherwise physical has been something we've seen during the pandemic. There will be a new balance of those sorts of things, which will bring physical and digital into alignment again, much more so than I think was in the past. So we must embrace the use of digital to change the carbon impact of what we offer.
That's an interesting kind of definite need to kind of plot out and plan out the whole idea of turning the information into intelligence. So it's kind of, it's just being very mindful within your organization of kind of actually what's going on using the tech, but then interpreting it into a language that the organization can then have debates around and start to make some decisions. Because just reporting data, as we know as marketers, goes over people's heads and people just aren't interested, but they're interested in our interpretation of that data. So I think, again, there's a responsibility here for doing proper marketing, not just playing the numbers game, putting a report in and saying, hey, we've done our job. Is actually taking it to that very next level and saying, look, this data we think means X, and reporting the X, not just the data.
Yes,
and we saw that come through in the greenwashing sort of conversation. So there's an interesting one sort of developing here then is, does the customer then really care about this? Because you've said about, you know, sort of adding the customer value as part of this, because ultimately that's why we're in marketing, that's what we're here to do. Do they really care yet or now?
The answer to that is undoubtedly yes. The question is how much, and how much are they prepared to pay for it? We've had conversations, you, me and Joe, in the past, where basically, you know, a lot of people would tell you that the solution lies with millennials, and I would probably disagree. I think the solution lies with boomers, because essentially speaking, they're the people who've got the time, the money, and the inclination, because they actually want to see a change. So you look at Extinction Rebellion, you look at many of the protest movements now, a high proportion, well, I'm not quite sure the actual proportion, but there's a significant proportion now of people who are protesting who are in my age group and older, and they want change. So the degree to which you accept that the customer wants that change depends obviously on your target audience. And I think you do need to think very clearly about segmenting that target audience. If you're going to go strongly down the decarbonisation route and the sustainability route, it will appeal more to some of your customers than to others. And you've got to think very clearly how that is going to be paid for. None of this is going to be free. So there is a cost, and we are seeing inflation now for various sources, whether it happens to be in the energy marketplace over the last few days, we've seen that quite significantly, but generally inflation from the rollout of the pandemic, Brexit, climate change, shortages, etc. This now is a very big challenge for marketers in terms of managing inflation, managing price expectations. And so we now need to think about how do we actually roll into that, the decarbonisation cost. And I think your point comes back to authenticity, but also clarity and honesty, and tell people, you know, it will cost X, and therefore we won't be the cheapest in the marketplace. And that will apply for nearly every company, but the small number who are the, you know, the cost leaders in the marketplace, or in your particular marketplace. And so I think, just coming back to your point, Neil, it is about segmentation of your customer base. You have to understand that the customer does care, but it's a degree to which they care that you need to understand, and the degree to which they are prepared to accept a cost, which will normally be in price.
It's a lovely little segue into kind of this thinking, which you touched on right at the beginning of this conversation, which was about the children's fire. And when it comes to something like the desire to change. And I just use your phrase there. I think it's really interesting that as marketers, one, yes, it's all very well looking internally to see whether there's all the kind of green credentials that we have, where we can save carbon footprint, blah, 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 all of that kind of stuff that's internal. But when we come to looking at this from a human perspective, to me, the work that Matt McCartney, who's the founder of Embercombe in Devon, has done, he talks a lot about this concept of the children's fire. And I think it's really quite sort of poignant to kind of mention this at this moment. So the children's fire is this indigenous sort of North American wisdom, whereby all the decisions that the elders make in these communities are based around the benefits for the next generations. And this is not just for the children or the children's children. This is for an infinite number of generations ahead. In other words, they're making conscious decisions in effect in business, but also in their sort of personal communities, based around the impact this has on future generations. And that's why it's called the children's fire, because they come together as a group, they sit around, and the only filter they use to make the yes and no decisions is, does this impact positively on the future generations? So when you talk about the boomers having the desire and the disposable income and the time to be able to make a difference here, then that perfectly segues into that philosophy, because it says, look, if you can identify, and again, coming back to Nigel's comment about the enthusiastic community that you're seeking here, if you can identify individuals who truly get the fact that this is not just a short-term commercial thing, this is for the future of everyone and everything, in other words, the creation of value at the widest level of impact, then actually you're starting to make some really conscious decisions here. I just love that analogy that Matt McCartney talks about, because it's something that's super practical for everybody every day. If you make every decision in this whole kind of sustainability piece, if you make every decision that is this positively impacting future generations, and you actually physically think of those future generations in that decision filter, you're never going to make a bad decision again, are you?
Interesting question. You may not ever make a decision. The interesting aspect of the American Indian approach is something that's been brought to me in about 1970, when people talked about pollution as being one of the biggest issues for the planet. And one of the American Indian sayings was that the white man was someone who is like a dying person, and they don't know the stench around them. And the element was that they were considering the relationship between man and the environment, which is partly what's been talked about here in the American fire, or children's fire. The aspect is that we do need to think about the future. The problem we have is that most organizational structures are too short-term. The stock market and the financial driving of short-termism has come into businesses, and we tend at most to look at 5-year plans. We really need to be, taking your point, 10, 20, 30-year plans. Now, there are some organizations that have been around, Japanese companies over the many years ago, where the Zaibatsu would actually look at 30 to 40-year plans. And one famous company had a 100-year plan. They are not necessarily as responsive to the degree of change that we now suffer, or you could see it the other way around, benefit from. The significant change that has gone on, technologically speaking, in the last 12 or so years, could not have been really contemplated at the beginning of the millennium. So thinking about what we do has to be very broad brush if we're thinking 40 to 50 years. But there are some actions that are doing that. There's one very large Chinese white goods company, which actually employs 2 people to do each role. one to action that role now, and the other to think about how that role could be improved and done better in a few years' time. And they have a much wider headcount than everybody else, but they are looking to future-proof their activity. And there's an article fairly recently in the Royal Society of Arts about a Japanese event that took place for the T20, which is the preliminary to the G20 meeting, which is looking and setting a group of elders in each of some of the rural villages in Japan as to what life would be like in 40 years' time and what action should be taken now to make sure that it's sustainable. Because they're suffering from significant depopulation. You know, you've got a significant proportion of their population, which is now over, well, not only 65, but I think there's several million people over 85. So we have an aging population, which we have to look after. We have a situation where there's a significant technological revolution, let alone evolution, going on in many sectors. AI, etc. And we do need to think about the implications of all of those things. So I think whilst I would like to agree that thinking about the impact of something that happens now over the next 40 to 50 years is good, it isn't necessarily going to be something that is practical, because the world will change very dramatically within that period of time.
It's always good when we have these interesting different dynamics and perspectives. So what are Charles Nixon's top tips then for making your brand more sustainable?
Carry on, I haven't got an answers yet. Well, I think you have to acknowledge initially to your marketplace that you recognize that this is an issue. So I think acknowledgement, taking whatever pledges need to be done. The college has signed up to various charters, and I think organizations need to sign up. I think you need to report regularly on activity to your marketplace, not only just to your stakeholders discreetly, but overtly to your marketplace. I do think that one of the biggest issues is the reuse, recycling, or repurposing of existing goods. And one of the biggest aspects that is not thought about is the fact that, you know, any product needs to be deconstructed after it has been, you know, used, and needs to be built in a way that is going to make that easy. BMW now, I think, recycles or can recycle 90% of its cars. And one of the arguments for electric cars is that they don't pollute. But one of the arguments against electric cars, which I'm often finding, is the fact that actually the recycling of the battery is not an easy thing. So, you know, you have to think about how that's built in or becomes built in to your product. So I think the decommissioning of products, and indeed, given the fact that we are often now consuming services or deconstructed, dematerialized products, that we need to think about how we are going to decarbonize elements of services. And I think that's become an important aspect. So whether it's the consumption of electricity through the file servers or emails, this is a big aspect, I think, that we need to think about. And, you know, nearly every building now really should be generating its own power. I think that's the other practical thing that should be done.
Charles, thank you so much for your wisdom and time and ideas and thinking today. It's been really good.
Pleasure, Neil. Thank you very much indeed. I hope some of it has been of use and not an old man rambling on.
I doubt very much whether people have thought that. Anyway, moving on to the end of this particular session. Thank you so much, Nigel and Charles, for your inputs today, and of course Lauren for hosting. We hope that as we've been going through this session, we've given you plenty to think about, and obviously built on the previous two sessions looking at defining it, hopefully not greenwashing it, but now fingers crossed, taking those first steps with technology, an enthusiastic community, maybe those sustainability guidelines that we talked about in the previous session, and hopefully, fingers crossed, allowing you or enabling you to take those early steps into the future. Lauren is going to pop up a short poll. Again, this is anonymous, so we won't know exactly who has said what, but we're curious to know the kinds of things that you would be looking to seek for future help, if you like, on this topic, on these subjects. So if you've attended this series, which clearly you have, which areas, if any, would be of personal interest to you for us to kind of follow up with next? We've got loads and loads of ideas, obviously the college and the Mindful Collective, mindfulcollective.net, a lot of resources and the upcoming apprenticeship through the college available. But we're just curious and interested in some of the things that may well have sort of been whetting your appetite as we've gone through this, and you're thinking, I'd like to have support in this or that. So cast your little vote just to give us a little bit of feedback. And when Lauren decides that enough is enough, she will post that little answer to you, and then you will see in real time, like we do, what people have thought. And no doubt we will be able to come back to you, unless it's none of the above, because we're probably going to come back to you anyway, I'm sure, with more information, but we'll see. At least it gauges the interest in a...
You can't hold a marketer down.
Once a marketer, always a marketer. So whenever you're ready, Lauren, if you just release those results, that would be great. Thank you very much. For the webinars, clearly the key into this, consultancy services, yeah, head over to mindfulcollective.net and you'll see some connection details there. And just exploratory conversations can be had there at no cost initially. Day courses and apprenticeships, we definitely have an interest in those. So we will be keeping you updated with stuff that we encounter and that we start to build over the next couple of months, because the first of the apprenticeships will be live, I'm told, by the end of this year. So we've got some really good stuff coming up. And the further webinars, well, we have no shortage of topics and ideas that I think probably have really come out of the discussions in these 3 sessions. So it'll be very interesting to really come back to you with some of those and really sort of help to build the agenda, because this is a collaborative thing. I think both Nigel and Charles said about collaboration here. So we're very, very keen to continue that collaboration, and that does involve you at whatever stage you are in the journey. Case studies and examples, problems, challenges, quick wins, low-hanging fruit that you've been able to pick off and thought, I'm actually making progress. We would genuinely love to hear those stories. So good and bad, challenges, opportunities, everything. We want to continue this debate with you, and we're very, very grateful. If you've been here for all 3 of these sessions, we're very grateful that you have been here for all 3 sessions. But if this is the first and only one that you've been part of, hopefully you've enjoyed it and found it of interest.